guys, so I am here with the last of the books that I read when I was in Toronto and didn't have Wi-Fi and didn't have TV or anything to distract me and a lot of spare time to read. So yes, finally we are at the end of these books. Yeah, I'm really excited to share these with you, so let's get to it. The first book I read for these was Margaret Atwood's Alias Grace. This tells the story of Grace Marks, who has been convicted of murder. And basically it is a psychologist who is visiting her and is interested in her case. I struggled to get into this book. I forced myself to read it. I read most of the books that I bought simply because I didn't have a lot of choice in what I was reading, because I was limited to what the bookstore had, and I really wanted to read some more Margaret Atwood because I feel like a bad Canadian for not only having read The Handmaid's Tale. I didn't enjoy this as much as The Handmaid's Tale, but it was really interesting. It reminded me a lot of Hannah Kent's Burial Rites, which is a similar story, though this was written before. And it's set in the 1800s in Canada, so it's quite colonial. It was interesting because it takes place in a place called Richmond Hill and Kingston, which is kind of near where I live. It's in the same province that I live, and I've visited all of these places, so it was really interesting to hear about these places written about in the past and like know where they actually are. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this book just because it was really hard to get into. I did end up enjoying it a bit in the end. The twist that happens, which I'm not gonna spoil for you guys, kind of wrecked it a little bit for me. I was getting into it and then the twist happened and I was like, oh, well this sucks. So I think I gave this like 2 or 3 stars on Goodreads. Not my favorite, but I will still continue reading Margaret Atwood because she is an institution in Canada. Next up, I read To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. This is my second Virginia Woolf book. I also read Mrs. Dalloway earlier in the year. I was so happy to find this. This is a popular penguin, which are really hard to come by in Canada and often quite expensive to order online, and I think it was like $5, which is so good. I really like these editions. They're nice, they're small, they are really simple, but they have good notes, so I really want to get more of these. Sorry, my bangs need to be cut, so they keep flopping into my eyes. But yes, this tells the story of the Ramsey family, and basically it's set in 2 parts. They are at their cottage, kind of. I want to say it's a cottage, but basically they're planning a trip to the lighthouse and everything goes wrong, and then it happens much later and they actually do the trip to the lighthouse. So this was interesting. I think I definitely preferred Mrs. Dalloway for Woolf's writing, but I did really enjoy this and I'm glad I read this, and I think I want to revisit this and maybe try and pick up on different things, but I'm going to wait like a year or so before I revisit it. I find with Woolf's writing, I really enjoy it the first time around, but I can't quite absorb everything the first time around. It is a very dense piece, so I will want to revisit this. Next up is a book that was recommended to me by Jean over at Jean's Bookish Thoughts, and that is Émile Zola's Therese. Sorry if I mispronounced that, you guys know my French is terrible. Continuing the tradition of French authors and horrible narrators, or basically characters, which I love. This tells the story of Therese and her husband Camille, who is also her cousin, who she's kind of been forced into marrying by her aunt. She's been left in their care basically because her parents died. And then she ends up, like, she's managed to repress her character so much, like her individuality so much, that when she meets Camille's friend Laurent and falls in love with him, it has really tragic and epic consequences. Oh, Therese and Laurent are horrible as like main characters, but it's just so amazing. If you like horrible characters, read this book. I loved this book. I thought this was absolutely amazing. I loved his characterization. Apparently it caused quite a scandal when it was first published in 1867. Yeah, so it was fantastic. It is gripping. It is just, if you like awful characters, read this. I adore awful characters, so I love this. Next up is another story with awful characters, and the first time I've read this author, and that is Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground and The Double, which are 2 novellas contained in the same volume. I was really happy. The next 3 well, the previous book and the next two are all Penguin Black English classics, which I love. I think they look quite nice on a shelf when you have a lot of them. They have really good notes. The typesetting's really nice. So yeah, I found Dostoevsky to be a little bit hard to read. I read them both in a day, and I was talking about this with Yamini a bit because she was also reading Notes from the Underground, and she commented that it took her a really long time to get through, and she thinks that's maybe a better way to read it than what I did. Also, having read Zola's Therese the day before and then reading Dostoevsky the day after, invariably I made comparisons. So I think that was a strike against these, so I am coming from a slightly biased place in reviewing these. Basically, Notes from the Underground tells the story of a anonymous narrator and basically how much he hates like St. Petersburg society and how much of it like rat race it is and how much he hates it. I just found he whinged a lot. Like, it was really annoying. Like, he went on and on about how much he hated it, but how much he didn't want to remove himself. Like, he'd retired and he had inherited a small, not fortune, but he inherited a small sum of money that he was able to live on, and basically he just kept, I don't know, yeah. And then the Double tells the story of basically a civil servant who keeps running into somebody who looks exactly like him. The problem with reading these two books back to back is that they both have unlikable male characters who rail against their society and who have really annoying servants in their eyes, although I don't really see how the servants are so annoying. So I think having these two books together also negatively influenced me. I am willing to give Dostoevsky another chance generally when it's an author like this who is so well known, and I'm not exactly keen on the first round of books that I read by them. I will get them 2 or 3 volumes, so I am looking forward to some more Dostoevsky, but I'm not in love with this. So the last book I read is another new author for me, and another French one, and that is Henri de Balzac's Old Girl. So once again, correct me if I mispronounce things. I think I got that right though, because I looked up how to pronounce his name. This tells the story of Goret and his 2 daughters. Basically, he's living in a boarding house and nobody really knows what's going on and people are gossiping about it. And basically the main character is Eugene Rastignac. I'm looking at the back. And he moves to Paris and he wants to make his fortune, and he's got some connections, but he also meets Goret's daughters and falls in love with them. They're quite well off. And it's interesting. I really enjoyed this when I read it. And then I thought about it after I'd read it. And the way Balzac portrays women in this is problematic to me. The male characters, despite all of their faults, are generally noble and, you know, are redeemable. The female characters are not. Especially reading this so close to Zola's Therese Raquin, I think I struggled a little bit simply because Therese Raquin is about 2 horrible characters. They're male and female, and they're treated equally. In this, there are horrible male characters, but they're given redemption and they're seen as good, whereas the female characters who have similar faults are basically written off as awful people. So that kind of underlying being a product of his time really bothers me a bit, especially when you consider how close Balzac and Zola were writing together, like within 100 years of each other. So it's a little problematic for me. I still enjoyed this book. I would still recommend it, but keep in mind when you're reading it that it is a little bit problematic in the way that it deals with its female characters. But I would recommend it. I'm looking forward to reading some more Balzac. Yeah, that's basically all I have to say about that. It was good. Bit problematic, but good. So that is the last of the books I read in Toronto. It's the last of the reviews I will have for a while, because I don't think I'm going to be reading quite as intensely as I did without Wi-Fi and without TV. I did really enjoy the experience, because it did force me to read quite a bit that I wouldn't normally have picked up, and it got me through a lot of books. I do wish I had packed more, although I didn't really have room for them. And yeah, so I will see you guys in another video. Bye.